and welcome to India Ascends, NDTV's premier international show. I'm Gaurie Dwivedi. India Ascends is your one-stop guide and destination for news and views from the world of global politics, economics, and the buzzing world of technology, with India at the very center of it. Let's get started. Let's get the headlines this Friday evening. Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina is in New Delhi, Modi 3.0, to focus on building stronger footprint in its immediate neighbourhood. Closer ties with Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives, top priority to counter China's debt trap diplomacy model. Flurry of diplomatic activity between India and the US. Days after Prime Minister Modi met US President Joe Biden in Italy, national security advisors of the two nations met in New Delhi, even as top US lawmakers were in Dharamshala to meet the Dalai Lama and pledge support for autonomous Tibet. Top global political commentator Fareed Zakaria speaks to NDTV, says US-India ties are much bigger than minor irritants like the Panun issue. On the upcoming US presidential polls, Zakaria says the political debate is essentially immigration versus abortion. Semiconductor chip maker NVIDIA topples Microsoft to become the world's most valuable company. NVIDIA now has a market cap of $3.3 trillion. $2 trillion of this has come in 2024 itself, indicating the massive bull run in the global chip space. Russian President Vladimir Putin visits North Korea, his first visit to the pariah state in 24 years. The two countries signed mutual defense treaty. The pact may complicate the security apparatus in Asia. With no amount of subs bringing back home buyers and prices dropping to 10-year record lows, the China real estate sector story may be headed for a big crash. How big is the problem? Find out on India Ascends. This week on India Ascends, we start with New Delhi's outreach in its neighbourhood. Now, Asia is at the very centre of one of the biggest geopolitical rivalries taking place in the world between India and China. Now, due to its larger economy, China has been able to further its political and military goals via the Belt and Road Initiative. And to counter this, India now needs to focus more on its neighbourhood, and it's already doing so. After inviting the very anti-India Maldivian president to New Delhi for his swearing-in ceremony, Prime Minister Modi is now focused on strengthening ties with Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, countries that sit on strategic points in the Indo-Pacific and have been recipients of very large amount of Chinese loans. China has been working on a string of pearls strategy, building strategic partnerships with New Delhi's neighbours. To counter China, India needs to focus on two big things: port connectivity and greater infra investments in its neighbourhood. Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina is in India. She and her party share a very good rapport with India. And in January this year, when Sheikh Hasina faced American criticism on her democratic credentials, it was New Delhi that backed her and continues to be one of her closest allies. India has extended LC business to Bangladesh worth $8 billion, but in comparison, Chinese investments last year was $7 billion. And via the debt trap BRI model, Chinese companies won construction contracts worth $22 billion. India's alternative to BRI is transparent and equitable contracts and grants. And nations know it. In fact, no one knows this better than Sri Lanka, which came under heavy debt courtesy massive Chinese loans. As Sri Lanka goes to polls in a few months, External Affairs Minister Jaishankar's visit to Colombo is testimony to New Delhi upping the ante. But it's not just about India versus China. Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Mauritius, Seychelles, and other smaller nations in the Indo-Pacific need to balance their development needs with geopolitical stability and choices that they will have to make. And it's up to regional leaders and heavyweights like India to limit the Chinese influence in the region by upping the ante and building better ties with their neighbours. The other big story on India Ascends: where are US-India ties headed under Modi 3.0? this week saw a great deal of activity between New Delhi and Washington, even as some irritants in the relationship have surfaced. NSA Jake Sullivan and Deputy Secretary of State Kurt Campbell held talks with External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar days after Prime Minister Modi and US President Joe Biden met at the G7 summit in Italy, even as a US congressional delegation, which included former US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, arrived in India. It is no coincidence that one of the first visits by high-ranking foreign officials in Modi 3.0 was from one of New Delhi's closest partners, that is, Washington. Yet, when Modi and Biden shook hands, Nikhil Gupta, an Indian national accused by the United States of allegedly being involved in a murder-for-hire plot against Sikh separatist Pannu, was extradited from Czech Republic to the US on 14th of June. It's unclear if any of this came up during Sullivan's meetings in India, which figured on much more than just this irritant.
I don't have more to add on the conversations that Jake's having. He's still over there having these conversations, but the main focus of his visit, as I said, was to look for ways to deepen the U.S.-India bilateral relationship, particularly when it comes to emerging technology.
Bring this up.
I don't have anything more to add on the conversations.
Now, the past decade has seen India and US sign numerous agreements, undertake joint military exercises, and restart Quad over China's aggressions in the Indo-Pacific. And it seems that the case involving Sikh separatist Pannu was being stoked to create divisions between what is one of the strongest and most robust strategic partnerships of the 21st century. In fact, US made an important geopolitical statement on Indian soil this week. US lawmakers, including former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, met the Dalai Lama in Dharamshala this week. India has given asylum to the 14th Dalai Lama and hosts the Tibetan parliament in exile on its soil. So even though it may not have started this power play on Tibet, India is now a key player on this.
His Holiness the Dalai Lama, with his message of knowledge and tradition and compassion and purity of soul and love, he will live a long time and his legacy will live forever. But to you, President of China, you'll be gone and nobody will give you credit for anything.
Now, it's not the first time that US lawmakers have made a trip to Dharamshala. India has allowed many such trips in the past, but it's different this time around. For one, there is the Resolve Tibet Act that awaits President Biden's nod, post which the global pressure on China to start talks with Tibet is likely to intensify. The second important bit is that President Biden had said in 2020 that he would meet the Dalai Lama. With him going to US for his medical treatment, it's almost likelihood, possibly a certainty, that there could be a meeting on the cards. And thirdly, India shares a border with Tibet, not China. And if Tibet had remained an independent country, it would have been the 10th largest such country in the world, which is why focus could come back on this issue. In fact, it's not just the geopolitical alignment between India and US. It is also the fact that now there is a complete meeting of minds on two other very important and strategic issues in this relationship: trade and technology. The second meeting of the US-India initiative on critical and emerging technology saw the two countries ramping up collaboration in AI, space, semiconductors, clean energy, and working to restrict access to countries such as China and Russia that have civil military usage of technology. The prospect of Taiwan's possible invasion and global impact it would have on semiconductor supply is making India and US launch a new strategic semiconductor partnership for precision-guided ammunition and other national security-focused electronics platforms. Bilateral trade figures have also seen a huge surge in the last 5 years. Between 2018 to 2022, on your screens are the numbers that tell the story. Exports have increased to $118.5 billion from about $83 odd billion. Imports have also grown from $58 billion to $73 billion. India actually has a trade surplus, one of the few countries with which India enjoys a trade surplus with the US. There you can see on your screens. And some of this will only look up once a free trade pact is signed between India and US. Now, strategically, India remains a crucial partner for the US, vital to help counter China's aggression in the region. Short-term snags will not impact the larger trajectory of this relationship, which is likely to only move forward. Okay, let's get the top voice on the show. Fareed Zakaria, global opinion commentator, speaking exclusively to NDTV. Mr. Zakaria, thanks so much for speaking to me. As we speak, there is enough and more that's happening as far as the US-India partnership is concerned. It's evolved. It's seen a huge amount of change and transformation since the Clinton and Bush era. How do you view it now in the backdrop of Modi 3.0 coming to power?
If you look at the Trump administration, one area where there was enormous continuity was on India. And in fact, Trump liked the fact that Modi was as popular as he was, particularly with Indians abroad. And so really the United States has made a strategic decision over the last 20 years to move closer to India and to try to make India part of the new Asian security system, naturally, largely in response to the rise of China. In that context, Modi coming back for a third term is a very beneficial thing for the US-India relations because it's continuity. Modi is a known character. But I don't want people to get the wrong impression. Had there been a change in government, I don't think there would have been any change in US-India relations because they have really been developing steadily more close for the last 25 years.
Absolutely. And while there is broad understanding and alignment on key strategic issues between US and India, I have to ask you this. How important or how significant do you think irritants like Pannun issue are? Or do you think they even matter in the larger scheme of the strategic partnership between India and US?
Look, there are always going to be some issues that cause disagreement, friction, tension between two countries. I mean, the United States has issues like that with European countries all the time, and they are the closest allies of the United States. I think that people were puzzled in Washington that the Indian government would be trying to do something of the nature of what it did. And frankly, it was a departure. It's not something the Indian government has done in the past very often. And so I think that they were more puzzled, taken aback, trying to figure out how to handle it. But I don't think it just seriously derails the relationship. It's an irritant. It has to be dealt with. And as far as I can tell, they have dealt with it, in a way that does not damage the overall relationship.
Before I come to your mercurial Republican candidate, I must point out, Mr. Zakaria, that these are still allegations. New Delhi has denied all of them. And as you mentioned, these are just irritants in a much larger relationship. Now, speaking of the US elections, Republican candidate Donald Trump is viewed as mercurial. He's, in fact, viewed as being averse to globalization. How much impact do you think this will have on mechanisms like Quad, which have been revived against a very aggressive China? Do you think they could come under threat under a possible Trump presidency?
The Obama and Biden administration have pushed for a kind of new architecture of security in Asia, which involves other countries, which partners with them, which allies with them. And that's a kind of slow, painstaking process where you have to listen to other countries, understand what their concerns are, try to find a way to accommodate those concerns, as the Biden team has done with India, but also with Australia, with South Korea, with Japan. Trump, as I say, is more impulsive. He's more transactional. So it could be, there's upside there, which is he might decide, to do some big favor to India because he feels like this is worth doing for this one particular deal. On the other hand, he may ignore it. That you won't get that steady, predictable building of an alliance structure, of a security structure. What you'll get is more whimsical, more one-shot deals. Some of which might be good, some of which might be bad. And by the way, this characterization that I'm giving you of the difference between the two is what worries large parts of the world, the unpredictability of it.
the unpredictability of a Trump administration. Speaking of the elections, Mr. Zakaria, how important is immigration? Do you think it's pretty much the fulcrum of what this election is all about? I'm asking you this also because Indians form a very large and sizable chunk of immigrants, and Republicans have been very vocal about it. President Biden is now coming out with executive orders on it. So how important is this issue in 2024 polls?
Immigration is huge in the context of the election. I think this is an election being fought largely on cultural issues. Immigration for the Republicans, abortion for the Democrats. The economy is doing fantastically. I mean, the U.S. economy, by any objective measure, is having one of its strongest periods in its history. Unemployment is at a 50-year low. Inflation is 3%. If you look at almost any measure, the United States is just towering over the rest of the world. You know, if you look at America's technology companies, they are absolutely dominant in their field. American banks are dominant. European banks are nowhere to be seen in comparison. America is the largest energy producer in the world. America now produces more oil than Saudi Arabia and more and more natural gas than Qatar. So you put all that together, it's a very powerful place. But President Biden is getting very little credit for it because the election is being fought largely on these cultural issues, immigration, abortion. And immigration is particularly important these days.
I think President Biden is getting credit for the turnaround that the U.S. economy has seen. But as we end this conversation, Mr. Zakaria, I want to ask you this, that what do you think are the big focus areas for US-India ties going forward? Everything from 6G to space is being talked about. But in your perspective, what could be that defining aspect of this relationship?
Well, I think what India should strive for is to kind of create a technological corridor with America, because India's great opportunity now is to move up the technology value chain in the way that China did. You know, people don't realize, well, India has a tech sector. It's largely back office processing. It's fairly simple stuff that involves using lower price labor. What India needs to do is to move up the value chain and start producing really high quality products in technology and software and services and things like that, even inventing new technologies. Chinese companies in the technology space are much, much more advanced than India is. India could ally with the US, find ways to develop those technologies, get technology transfer, training, all that kind of thing. But India has to really make a decision that it's going to cast its future in that way. It needs to. India is still one of the, I think it is probably the most protectionist large economy in the world, which makes it very difficult for it to plug into the world of globalization, technology. It's difficult to be at the cutting edge when you are that protected. It still has so many features that remain part of the license quota Raj, particularly with regard to trade. And the BJP has traditionally not been very good about these issues because it has always been suspicious of the foreign world and foreign trade. So if it could really open itself up, ally with the US, I think you could see an enormous advance that would take place in India economically, technologically, scientifically. And that, I think, would be the thing that would really help India catapult itself. India has the potential to really be one of the great technology powers in the world. And technology is what is driving economics. It's what's driving the alleviation of poverty. It's what's driving the advancement of society. We live in an age of a digital revolution. And India needs to be at the forefront of that revolution. It couldn't get a better partner than the United States. American companies and American universities absolutely dominate this space. But India has to stop being reluctant and being kind of pulled along, kicking and screaming. It has to jump into this world and say, we want to be at the forefront. The way, for example, that Israel did, the way in which countries like Sweden and Britain have done. That's the potential future for India. I hope it takes it. I think America will find a willing partner and a ready partner in America. That would be more important to my mind for the life of average Indians than defense cooperation and things like that, which will happen and should happen. But it won't. That doesn't change the life of the average Indian. That doesn't move Indians out of poverty. That doesn't move India up the value chain. Embracing a technology corridor with the US, that would be a game changer.
Okay. All right. With that, thanks much, Mr. Zakaria, for speaking to NDTV. There is, of course, a lot that can be done as far as the India-US ties are concerned. Tech could be that one big X factor. And on that note, we slip into a very short break. We come back with lots more on the other side. Stay with us. Welcome back to India Sense. We now focus on a story that impacts every one of us in this segment. Now, climate change is no more a thing that the next generation needs to worry about. It's now an emergency that the present generation needs to address. By the next one, it will probably be a bit too late. There are now wild weather swings that are taking place around the world, not just in developing countries, but even the abode of rich and mighty, the French Riviera. Wild weather swings now wreak havoc to the global economy, from testing power grids to skyrocketing food prices. And by 2049, these damages could cost the global economy a whopping $38 trillion every year, more than 6 times of what is needed to cut emissions as per the Paris Pact, which is $6 trillion. But here's the alarming part. The world is not even spending this much. Spending on clean tech stood at $1.8 trillion in 2023. As we live in these times of wild weather, watch this report to take a look at the real extent of the climate catastrophe that stares all of us.
From a record-breaking heat wave in India to extreme weather in Brazil, USA and Mexico, climate catastrophe is here. The month of May was the 12th consecutive month of record-breaking temperatures, with average temperatures at 1.52 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial age. This is likely to make 2024 the hottest year on record. But that's not all. For England, this has been the wettest year since 1836. For Dubai, it witnessed its worst floods ever. And for Canada, it saw wildfires that burnt continuously for a year. In India, the severe heat wave this summer may have killed at least 100 people and made tens of thousands very sick. The heat wave has been deadly for the US. As per the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, heat contributed to the deaths of more than 2,300 Americans in 2023. The death toll has more than doubled in the past 5 years. In March, the Saharan dust storms turned skies yellow and orange and degraded air quality in European countries, from Greece to Italy to France. If there's one thing that the climate emergency shows, it is that it will impact all countries, including the most advanced.
Now, reports show that a 1% increase in global temperature leads to a 12% decline in world GDP. And as expected, this will hit poorer countries much more than their rich counterparts. In Middle East and Africa, the projected income loss by 2049 will be 22.4%. For South Asia, it will be 22.3%. For Europe and America, the loss would be half, 11%. But the disruptions that will be coming because of this to housing, food prices, energy, transportation costs will spare no one. In fact, as per ICF, the lifetime cost of climate change for a baby born in US today is $500,000. This may rise further. When will the rich countries that have historically been high polluters rise together? Shifting our focus now to China. Beijing has been struggling to get back to its pre-pandemic levels, and while manufacturing is picking up, its real estate sector, which makes up almost a quarter of the economy, is showing no signs of recovery. The Chinese government seems to have done everything it can, but it doesn't seem to be enough. And just how bad the situation for China's housing is, well, the short answer to that is very bad. New home prices fell at the fastest pace in nearly a decade. The May price drop was the 11th month-on-month fall and the steepest since October 2014. Worse still, the government's measures have all seemed to fail. From reducing rates to easing eligibility criteria to even offers of rolling over loans, nothing seems to be bringing customers back. And it won't. Because the prognosis is wrong and the response inadequate. The sector is struggling because home buyers are unsure of their economic future. They're uncertain about the prospects of the big real estate companies and the larger demographic trend, which reflects a rapidly aging society which isn't going to go about buying houses. Now, this can't be solved by asking local governments to buy unsold inventory and turning them into affordable housing. For starters, there are no takers for that many housing units. And secondly, the amount promised by Xi Jinping to local governments is not even 10% of the value of unsold houses that need to be brought. And above all, since China's economic model focused on local governments taking large debts to build those giant infrastructure projects for the last 15 years, their balance sheets are now maxed out. They cannot take more loans, even if it means at the cost of the collapse of the housing sector. If anything, China can learn from the Indian real estate market. The sector here is 7% of the GDP, not 25% as it is in China. It has checks and balances on developers through regulatory bodies. And even if developers have stretched balance sheets, the consumer demand is real. There are no ghost towns in India. China's real estate sector is yet to bottom out, and it remains to be seen whether it will take the economy with it. All right, on that note, it's a complete wrap on this edition of India Sense. Thanks so much for watching.